And that's why they call it the Pit Band. What's going on, everybody? This is the Coverbandconfidential podcast. The podcast are cover band musicians and band leaders to learn how to rock more and suck less. In Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Adam Johnson.
In Greensboro, North Carolina, I'm Dan Ray.
I was just talking with Dan on the pre-record that my son is making his theatrical debut
Right.
in Chicago Teen Edition, which
Love it.
is marked that way
Yes.
in all the announcements. Chicago,
Yes.
colon, Team Edition.
Yeah, there's some very careful editing been done between the Broadway edition and the teen edition.
But again, the whole point of the story is she murders her husband, but they blame it on jazz and liquor. What are they going to say? It's like
They're just going to razzle dazzle them.
mumble rap and vaping? Is that the modern equivalent?
No, they're just going to pull out some of the references. That's all.
Opening night's on Thursday, so he's in the middle of Tech Week. He's experiencing this whole thing totally dry. He's never done anything like this before. He got voluntold that he was playing bass in this thing.
Nice. Love it.
Maybe a week and a half ago. So he's had 19 days, top to bottom, before opening night. And so they went in at 4 and you ended when it ended. And then it's just like that for the next, 3 days until opening night on Thursday. And he's not really in the pit because they're doing it cabaret style. So the band's on stage for the whole show. Me and my wife are just over the moon. So excited because we were both theater kids. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this will either be the thing where he's like, oh, this is the thing I want to do. Or he's like, yeah, great. Anyway.
Yeah. Glad that exists. I'm out. Yeah. We'll see.
So what have you been up to, man?
I've been here. Been here. You needed me. I was here, pretty much on the couch.
Yep.
We're in the last 2 weeks, halfway through the last 2 weeks. Spirits are high. Spirits are good. I'm feeling.
That's awesome.
Feeling ready. I'm feeling ready to just walk like crazy. Just walk around.
Just walk your face off, dude.
Walk my brains out. So I'm in this boot, orthopedic boot, and it's got, I don't know if I've talked about this before, a foam wedge.
Yes.
At the back of the floor of it, keeping my toe, say, dorsiflexed, pointed down, right, to keep stress off the Achilles. And today was the first day I peeled one layer off of that. And the mission over the next several weeks is to bring the foot flat to the bed of the boots. And so that was good. Felt like progress. It's exciting. It's exciting times. There's a little tiny wedge of foam that I felt inordinately good about. So
the fact that you are still kind of in the middle of it, but feeling good about it is positive, because a lot of times it's just the doldrums of it happening that just, your goodwill kind of erodes just from the persistence of it,
I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. The first 3 weeks, I was pretty miserable, but I can definitely see where we're headed, and by God, we're going to get there.
Yeah. So, I mean, editing last week's episode, there were a couple of moments where I was like, it's going to trim this up a little bit. It's feeling a little rough. You were doing your best to put on a face, this is broadcasting, but
Yeah, last week was tough. This week's been better, and
good.
I have the boot dialed in now in a way
Nice.
that it's not hurting me anymore. And I think it's all headed the right place. I will say, I love these days that doctors' offices have portals that you can message your doctor on, and they just get back to you. And you don't have to call in and talk to a nurse and leave a message and wait for them. I'm straight up Gen X, but I'm way too much of a millennial to want to do any of that nonsense. So my doc's been great about getting back to me on messages, and so all fine. Not what I want to be doing right now, but we made the choice. Here we are. It's all good.
All things considered, best case scenario.
For sure.
Fantastic. So let's see. This week has been just doing a bunch of handiwork, and most of it band related. At our last show, when we were loading in, the casters on our KW subs have kind of slowly been disintegrating, and they finally just gave up the ghost, where you're trying to push this thing and it's even though you're on flat ground.
Yeah.
So something had to be done. And I went to look on QSC's site to see what they charge to replace those casters, and they wanted $122 for replacement casters. And I thought, that's a silly price for what those are.
Yeah, I agree.
So I went on to Amazon and found locking casters that were the exact same footprint as far as like the mounting points, because ultimately I just didn't want to have to re-drill or use new hardware.
Right.
So I was able to use the existing hardware, and I was able to do that for $23.
Very nice.
Which is significantly lower if you're a numbers person.
Yeah.
Let's say.
Even if you're not.
So if you own a pair of those subs and you are looking for them, I'll go ahead and throw a link in the show notes. Just tuck that away for a rainy day. I'm probably just going to go ahead and buy another set because I know the other sub is on its way out. So, just go ahead and just take that into consideration and get it all sorted.
Yep.
The other thing that I was talking about it on last week's episode was wireless DMX, and I was like, you know what? Forget it. I'm just pulling the trigger. So upon the recommendation of other folks in the Patreon Slack, I went with the Donner wireless DMX.
Yes.
They came in on Thursday, plugged everything in.
It just works, right? It just does. It's the most amazing. I have two 4-packs, and like they're just all on the same frequency. They find each other. They do their thing. It's great. I wish they were battery powered. Finding a place to plug them in is a pain in the butt.
Yep.
But apart from that, could not be easier.
So I was having an issue because when I plugged them in, nothing happened. And I was like, that's weird. And then I realized that the light that I had used for my test wasn't on the DMX input mode. It was just on static. So once I did that, wouldn't you know it all worked.
Yep. Now, fortunately, some of those lights have, courtesy jacks built in. The 4 bars have a standard power plug, built in. So that's a place you can get power for them. So that works out okay. But I think they're totally the way to go. Way better than running wires.
Yeah. Well, and the cool thing is that depending on your situation, you can use them as you need them. So if you've got 2 or 3 lights that are within a short distance, you can use cables if you want to connect them.
Yeah.
And then use them in other scenarios where having it wireless is way better. Like in our situation, like all the stuff that's kind of backstage, like by the drums and that kind of thing, the wireless ones make way more sense because there's just more stuff back there.
Right.
But on the front where we've got, the movers and then all of the, like the floor panels and all of that, throw a couple of cables in the mix. No harm, no foul.
For sure. You can even use the wireless to jumper to a cabled group of lights.
That's right.
So it's a lot of flexibility comes with those things.
So I went with the 8-piece set just to make sure that if I needed them, I could expand it if I wanted to. And I think all in was like $170. They're currently on sale on Amazon. Again, we'll drop a link in the show notes if that's something that you're looking for. And we've got a gig this coming Saturday, and we're just kind of lining stuff up, making sure everything is good to go there. It's going to be more or less a rehash of the gig that we did on Valentine's Day. Same lineup, roughly same material. We're doing this up north of town in Dahlonega, which is the place where the first American gold rush occurred. If you don't know about that.
I don't.
Even before the San Francisco one back in 1849.
They found gold out on Dahlonega.
Yep, them there are hills.
All right.
Thumbs up reaction from your camera.
Yeah, that's good.
And another thing that happened is, you were talking about both lighting.
Yes.
And I had reached out to them last year and never got back to me. And I was like, maybe I'll just shoot another email to them. And they got back to me.
Nice.
And so we're either going to be doing a couple of test units or setting up some pricing to get some to test out.
Very cool.
But I'm excited for that because again, wireless DMX. So they'll, integrate into our system right away and should be a great addition to try them out.
Those standalone bars are so great. You just turn them on, you got to make sure you remember to charge them and all that stuff, but turn them on and they're like, oh, I'm hearing everything. Off I go. It's like, it's so easy. It's so great. And of course, that company, is right here in Greensboro. Their shop is about 4 miles from my house. So if you ever need me to go in and demo stuff or shake my fist or anything like that, I can do it.
Absolutely. And actually, one thing I wanted to note is that we've got spring break coming up and I'll be going to Disney for that week.
Excellent.
And I've got an interview that I want to link you in with because I think this is kind of an advantageous thing. We were talking about the prompter situation.
Yeah.
They had reached out right after NAMM, but had talked with Dave over at GigGab. I was like, hey, let's take some time, spread it out because our audiences are pretty close and overlap with one another. But I think you would be the perfect person to do that interview because, that's a thing that you've been very intent on learning more about.
I've tried a lot of different things, and my current fix for my acoustic karaoke is people have to bring their phone up.
Right.
I give them a link to the Genius for a page from my app. Not ideal. Not ideal at all.
So I think that's a very advantageous
Great. Love it.
setup.
Love
so
it.
we'll be doing that.
Perfect.
And while we're kind of in the housekeeping situation, no reviews this week. So we'll just, we'll leave it at there. One thing I did want to note is for the past, I guess 6 months probably, it feels like it hasn't been long, but it's probably been longer than I'm able to kind of measure. Jeff Grant, the Dude in Long Johns, as you may know him as, has been generous enough to provide the outro for the show every week. And one thing that every week he says is that he was jealous about folks that were in the Patreon Slack group because that's something he really wanted to do. Well, as a token of our appreciation for what he has given to the show, we actually granted him access to the Slack. He's been in there for the past few weeks and just contributing and stuff. And we just wanted you guys to know that we weren't just going to leave Jeff hanging.
That's right.
Saying that he wanted something. We wanted to make sure that he understood that we appreciated his contribution to the show. Ergo, he becomes a part of that community.
That's right. And, we'd be open to submissions of the next bumper that we want to,
of course,
put on there. So, get making.
Yeah. We understand the contribution is as important to you guys as it is to us. And, we are appreciative of all of that. We do a lot of crowdsourcing in the Patreon. We're coming up with topics and stuff every week, trying to make sure that we are talking to the right people and talking about the things that the people that are already consuming our content want to know about. So we've got our ears to the ground as best we can to make sure that you guys are getting what you need and that we can show our appreciation on the other end of it. And that's pretty much it as far as housekeeping goes. I feel like we've got some good momentum going as far as group contributions and topics. One thing that Dan and I were kind of back and forth about as far as things we wanted to talk about particularly came from the Patreon group and stuff that we've been discussing over the past few weeks. But this week's topic is actually something that Dan has requested.
Yes.
Because he and I talk all the time about stuff outside of the context of the show because weirdly enough, we're like friends.
Yeah.
And we just share stuff.
Yeah.
And so a couple of weeks ago, Dan goes, all right, sell me on the wing. Yep. I want to know what it is. Why'd you go this route? Pitch it to me.
Listen, I've been, I think, entirely happy. It's hard for me to even think of a thing that I haven't been happy about with my Soundcraft UI24R.
There was that weird power situation, but that was a few years ago.
It was a bug in the firmware before the last update, and so that shouldn't be a thing that ever happens again. But gosh, here's this new thing called a wing, and God knows I'm as big a gear sucker as anybody. And I have eyeballed the X32 rack some, and wasn't really compelled to move to it. But this wing is looking, is it the new standard? Maybe it is. The X32 rack has been a standard. I guess I'd say, there's the Behringer XR series. It's sort of the entry level. And that comes in a few different sizes. The biggest of those was where I started my career. I want to say it was an 18.
Mm-hmm.
And then the UI24R was my upgrade to that. And that was a notable jump in quality. But is it time? Is it worth it? Let's just get into it. Let's get into it.
Yeah. So the way that we're going to approach this conversation is that we are operating from the things that we know about. So from my side, most of the comparisons are going to be made versus the X32 rack because that's where I was coming from when I made that upgrade. And Eric, on the same note, Dan's going to be coming at this from the Soundcraft side. So we're going to be talking about specs and we'll kind of go through general categories of those devices and then who kind of comes out on top as far as that specific criteria goes. That's kind of the way that we felt like it was the right way to approach it.
Yep. And I have pulled up the UI24R both at the Soundcraft site and on Sweetwater so that I'm sure I'm telling the truth about its features and all the stuff.
We're going to start base level. We're talking just raw specs. first off, let's talk about the size of these units. Now, the X32 rack is a 3 rack unit situation.
Yes.
It's more compact. It weighs 14.5 pounds as far as just the actual hardware goes. The wing rack, 4 units, a little bit bigger. It's also 20 pounds, actually almost 21 pounds all in. So if you're talking about making it as compact as possible, the X32 has the edge there.
Yep. The Soundcraft UI24R is a 4-unit beast, and it weighs 22 pounds, so it's the heaviest of the lot. Now, the other thing to note, and you mentioned this, I don't remember if we were recording for the podcast or not at the time, but you mentioned that you have rattle room at the back of your rack case, and you're going to actually get a case that has less depth to it. The Soundcraft is 6.8 inches deep, and I have it in a full depth case, which I like because it gives me storage room in the back of that case.
Right.
Do you know the depth of the wing off the top of your head?
It is definitely deeper than 6 inches. You know, the standard shallow depth, I believe, is 9. If you're if you're looking at like rack depth.
Yeah.
And it's probably around that, but the rack that we currently have, I think, is 16 or 18 deep. It's like, the thing that I don't like about it is when I pick it up, the weight distribution is way off.
Sure.
And this is a very specific reference, but if you ever worked in like food service, if you ever like picked up a thing of soda syrup, like you're refilling the Coke fountain, whatever, where you just have this like big bag of thing and it's just like the weight is constantly shifting. That's what it feels like to pick that thing up. Yeah. And so I'd rather have something that's a bit more compact where that weight distribution just is not so uneven.
Yeah, that makes sense. My rack, certainly you can, when you pick it up, you know which end's the front. No
Right.
question about that. But it does have wheels. So I rarely move with it, in my arms.
Yeah, even with the, the pull out handle and stuff, you really like, it is one of those things where you have to push a foot against it to kind of kick it over.
Yep.
I'm actually surprised that the Soundcraft is actually heavier
me too.
than the wing itself.
Yeah.
So ultimately, X32 rack has the edge here. It's the lightest, smallest unit out of the offerings here.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to inputs outputs.
Yep.
Now this was something that I was actually surprised by, because the reason why we went with the wing was specifically for I/O and expansion. And one thing we should note is that the reason why folks are going with the wing, the X32 rack, or other ones, and not the XR series, is that the XR is very much a self-contained situation. There is no expansion option.
That's right.
They don't have Ultranet. They don't have any connectivity that allows you to connect it to another unit. They are as is what they are.
Yep.
So, talking about physical inputs, WingRack has 24 combination inputs, so TRS, XLR deal. And then it's got 8 XLR outputs or 4 stereo 1/4-inch outputs.
And is that really OR? I mean...
It is OR.
So you can't route separate tracks to those 8 mono XLRs and the 4 stereo 1/4 inches?
Nope. It is one or the other.
Interesting. Okay.
Which was something that we were surprised by when it was announced, because you look at the back and you're like, holy Snopes, you could have all of these outputs and stereo like that. That's great. Not quite the case. But there's still some reasons why the wing rack is the better option, and we'll talk about those a little later on in the conversation.
Yeah.
The X32 rack, let's get into that. So 16 XLR inputs. It's got 6 TRS inputs as far as auxiliary inputs, and then it's got 6 auxiliary 1/4-inch outputs, as well as 8 XLR outs, and then 2 additional 1/4-inch outputs. Plus, there's RCA. There's a couple of other, like, as far as on-board I/O, X32 rack kind of eats everybody's lunch as far as versatility goes.
I guess as you read all that, I had a hard time sort of picturing what those were and how I'd plug things into them. But yeah, it's a lot of words. I have on the Soundcraft, I've got 10 combos and 10 XLRs in, and then output is 2 XLRs plus 2 1/4-inch, and then it's got 8 additional XLR aux outs. So I am now fully booked for aux outs. If there was a reason for me to upgrade, it would be to get more aux out.
Right.
It doesn't sound like Wing Rack has that. It sounds like it's got the same 8. No, I'm sorry. Hang on. Does the 8 XLR outputs include main?
It does.
All right. So it's 2 fewer than what I've got, right?
Right.
Okay.
But
But
as we progress,
crucially,
this will all become clear as to why the Wing's got a bit of a strategic advantage there.
Right.
But in this particular category, X32 Rack is eking out the win in this round.
Okay.
So you gotta give respect where respect is due, you know?
Yep.
And X32 has earned it. So let's get into the third category. We're talking about channel and bus configurations. Now this is where things start to kind of like veer off pretty considerably. So the 32 in the X32 is the total number of inputs that you've got available. So
yeah,
that's where that's coming from. So 32 input channels and 16 mix buses on the X32 rack. While it does support stereo linking of channels and buses, it doesn't offer a ton of flexibility. And if you have ever tried to configure stereo bus outputs for like in-ears on an X32, you'll know that you have to actually mix those independently. It's like left and right. You have to do them one at a time.
Ooh.
Not a really great UX, in my opinion. The Wing Rack, on the other hand, has 48 input channels, and any of those can be configured as mono, stereo, or mid-side, which is not a configuration that I have ever heard of or used before.
What does that mean?
I don't even know.
Oh, okay.
If you know what mid-side means, email us, coverbandconfidential@gmail.com.
Mid-side.
It also provides 28 stereo buses, which is 12 more than the X32 has.
Yeah.
So as far as routing and mixing options, the Wing Rack is just, it's got more options and way more flexibility.
Yeah, the Soundcraft has 8 total buses in addition to the channeling. The routing is in theory very flexible. I mean, it comes to life with every input mapped to a sequential channel. But, you know, I was able to route the mains to a stereo pair of auxes for feeding the Maestro DMX without any trouble. So there's some flexibility there, but nothing like the wide open sort of palette of routing options you clearly have with the Wing.
I'll go ahead and say that that's a bit of a double-edged sword, but we'll get into that a little later on.
I would say.
Yeah. So moving on to the next category, we're talking about preamps and audio quality. Now, the X32 comes with 16 Midas designed preamps. And they're very specific about that. It's not that they are Midas preamps. They're designed by Midas. So they are splitting hairs, whatever, but they're not the same level as what comes on other hardware.
Yeah.
Wing Rack, on the other hand, comes with 24 Midas Pro preamps, which are the same preamps that are on the M32 series, which is a step up.
Yep.
Now, for the person sitting in your audience 50 feet away from your mains, can they tell that?
They don't know.
Probably not. But as far as like headroom and clarity, there's something to be said that the Midas Pro preamps do have a particular sonic quality that is an improvement on the alternative.
Yeah. The UI24R has 20 Studer designed preamps. I don't know who Studer is, but I will say when I upgraded from the XR18 to this device, the inputs felt and sounded a lot nicer. More headroom, more warmth, more clarity. So Studer did a good job, I guess, apparently there. But Midas is really the name you know for these things.
So Studer is a very well-known console level deal.
Yeah.
Now their preamps are not necessarily super high-end or world-renowned in the same way that like other preamps are, but competent, capable, you know, good stuff.
I've never had complaints.
Yeah. But like you said, so going from like the XR to that, and then, you know, us going from the X32 to the Wing, the general consensus is this sounds different, this sounds better. So in our world, we'll go ahead and give the wing rack the edge there because they do in fact sound better. I can confirm that they sound great.
Yep.
All right. Now this is something where I feel like the Behringer stuff has a pretty considerable edge over what you're working with, and that is the actual user interface and control.
Yes.
So both the X32 rack and the wing rack have user interfaces on the console. That is something that the Soundcraft does not have.
Correct.
It is very much a stage box that you plug stuff into.
Yep.
The wing rack has a 10.1 inch tilting touchscreen, which I didn't think the tilt was like that big of a deal, but actually having it out in the real world where it's sitting on either on stage or on top of another rack, being able to tilt that at a position where like you're staring down at it clearly is actually a very nice feature that I was not expecting to appreciate.
Totally get it. I totally get it.
It is touchscreen. You can, it is one of those things where you could theoretically run a show from that interface. Now, the X32 has an LCD display on it, but all of the buttons are physical buttons that you push and rotary encoders. The Wing has a couple of rotary encoders, but everything else is touch interface. So you could run a show off of either one of those units, but if you really had to, the wing rack is going to give you a better user experience overall. And I'll go ahead and say that coming at it from the mobile situation, like using my phone or an iPad, the Wing Q application and the larger format iPad app are very nice as far as getting around and just the overall look and feel. And like we were talking before, when you're dealing with stereo mixes versus mono mixes on like an X32, you can just go in and pan stuff like you normally would. Whereas doing that on the X32, M32 Q stuff it's really clunky and just not as nice.
Yeah.
For the Soundcraft, you guys it's all web interface, right?
That's right. That's right. It runs inside a browser. It doesn't have an app of its own.
Right.
People hear that and like feels cheap or something. And maybe it is cheaper to build than an app of its own, but yeah, it's always been very performant. I've never had a problem with it. It's done great.
So in this category, Wing Rack has the edge. It wins this round.
Yep.
All right. Next category, routing flexibility. This is where it gets really interesting. So the Wing Rack, the routing capabilities are kind of insane. Any input can be assigned to any channel and any output, including multiple outputs, which is really cool. But if you don't know what you are doing, the potential of completely borking your routing setup on something like this is very easy to do. It's going to make troubleshooting and complicated stuff a lot more challenging to configure.
I'm trying to think of a reason I wouldn't just want it, like the X32 comes out of the box. One input is mapped to one channel, and 2 is mapped to 2, and 3 is mapped to 3, and that just seems like the way you would want it. I guess all that flexibility must have a purpose, but I can't quite fathom it.
Well, let me break it down for you then.
Do, please.
The main thing is being able to make channel 1 stereo or mono. And so in order to do a lot of this stuff, it does require additional I/O, which the Wing is very flexible. So if you wanted to make a particular channel, whether it's keys, guitar, it can either be mono or it can be stereo. And the idea that you could take 2 channels of audio and assign it to a single fader is kind of nice. You can adjust the overall level of both of those channels with a single fader. That's the intent of that flexibility, that routing option. So when you're looking at it from the rear panel, if everything is stereo or certain things are stereo, well, obviously that's going to eat up multiple physical inputs.
Right.
So it gives you the ability to do a lot on the back end, but make it a lot more streamlined. For the front of house engineer and the musicians on stage, that's the intent at least.
Okay. All right. I get that. On the UI24R, and I think the X32, you can merge pairs of inputs into a stereo pair, and then the faders move in sync. You just move one of them and they both move. Mm-hmm. They're linked, yeah. And that has made some sense. And for sure on the Soundcraft, everything from input on is linked. So effects are linked, and all of it is treating it like it's one channel. But I guess it's nice to have half of the horizontal space saved by having it just appear in one fader channel. That's
right.
Nice. Interesting. Okay. All right.
And the same, would count for panning and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You could theoretically do it with 2 independent channels, but the fact that you can do it, with just a single channel block is kind of a nice feature. But again, you have to know what you're doing to set that up the right way, because it could get away from you pretty easily.
For sure.
So the X32 has pretty standard routing options like you had mentioned, but they're just not as versatile as what the Wing can offer. So in this case, the Wing has the edge, but if you are coming at this from a straight traditional live sound knowledge base, the X32 is going to be a lot more intuitive, let's say.
Yeah, makes sense.
So this is the one that I think you were the most interested in, which is effects processing.
Well, it's one of the ones.
Yeah. So the X32 has built-in effects. It's going to be, your standard kind of studio stuff. It's got some emulations of some outboard gear. It's got some delays. It's got some reverbs, and they sound good. You can put them into a, auxiliary for like your vocals, and you're going to get a good, end product out of it.
Okay.
What the Wing can do though is a bit elevated, let's say. The Wing comes with 80 different effects, and it includes a lot of emulations from makers like Pultec, SSL, Neve, Focusrite, DBX, Empirical Labs. Like, they went to pretty great lengths to put some really solid outboard gear emulations in. And they actually have really solid amps in there too, weirdly. You could literally plug your guitar directly into it. I posted a video right after I got the Wing rack of me playing an Angle amp directly into the mixer itself, which is pretty impressive. On top of that, it's got pitch correction. It's got stuff that other consoles don't have built in. A lot of those things can do that, but it requires additional hardware, connectivity to computers, that kind of thing. For an all-in-one hardware solution, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better option than the Wing rack.
For sure.
What does Soundcraft got?
Reverb, delay, and there actually is a guitar amp modeler from Digitech in it that I played around a little bit with. I didn't not enough to feel like I could really use it in practice. Plus, I don't have the hardware I would need to stomp it on or off or change it for songs or anything like that. So it's not very useful for a guitarist in that way. It does have some signal processing things. It has compression by DBX. It's got DBX's AFS2 auto feedback suppression, which has saved my bacon a couple of times. It's listening to the mains and hearing when a pitch is starting to break through, and it notches the graphic EQ, or the parametric EQ rather, right on that frequency. And it's good. It really works. I had that in can't remember, it was a 1U thing that was a speaker tuning unit. Somebody will have to write it and tell me what the name of that thing is. They'll know it when I talk about it.
Yeah.
But, some other kind of EQ touches, a de-esser and a noise gate and some things like that. But nothing anywhere near as rich in terms of effects processing as what the Wing's got. Nowhere close.
Right. The Wing has double the effects engines and insert points as the X32, and it uses a 40-bit internal processing algorithm, which means nothing to us, but it's supposed to provide greater accuracy and an expanded dynamic range over what the X32 offers. So it just does it more better.
Yep.
So Wing rack wins this round too. Okay. Next one, connectivity. Now, this is honestly the reason why we ended up jumping ship from the X32
right
to the Wing rack. The X32 has additional connectivity, which is fine. It's got AES-50, it's got USB, it's got Ultranet, and it also has the standard stuff, MIDI and that kind of thing. AES-50 is the way that you would connect it to something like an S16 or an S32 stage snake.
Yeah.
Which is basically just a digital connector with additional I/O. What the Wing rack offers is a couple of other formats. So it's got AES-50, it's got USB, it's got AOIP, and it's got Stage Connect. So Stage Connect is the one that ended up being the clincher for us, because What Stage Connect allows you to do is to easily patch multiple racks together with a single cable.
Yeah.
You could do that with AES, but in a scenario like ours where you needed just a very basic amount of inputs and outputs to connect to the main unit, we could have done that with an S16, but it would have cost 2 or 3 times what the Stage Connect interface that does the same thing would do. So the idea that you could get a single rack unit deal that offers 8 inputs and 8 outputs that connects to the wing rack by a single XLR cable was kind of the clincher for us. And it was like that interface is less than $400.
Pretty good.
And that's what did it. That was honestly, that's what we ended up doing, is that the idea that we could take all of our RF, put it in a satellite rack and just patch it together without using multi-pin or some other really expensive interface.
Yeah.
That was all we really needed to know.
Yeah, that's good. The UI24 has a cascade feature. So if you buy 2 of them, you can connect them over Ethernet and they work as one big unit, and essentially you got double the IO, but you had to buy it twice.
Right.
So there's that.
Yeah. In our world, that was the big clincher for us, was just being able to easily patch stuff in without overkill, which I think is what you were saying. Like, yes, this is possible with the Soundcraft, but it is in fact overkill.
Yep.
Because if you need 2 more preamps, you had to buy 24 more.
Right.
Which feels like a lot.
Feels like a lot. I could find a reason to have 8 more auxes, but I don't need 24 more inputs. I'm barely using 10 inputs right now.
And then the other thing that the X32 and the Wing have is the expandability option. So it's got a card space that you can put, different things in. Now the X32 comes with an option to connect via USB, which allows you to do multi-track recording, which is really nice.
Yes.
The Wing rack comes with the it's not the X Live because it's a different format, but it's the SD card multi-track recording deal.
Yeah, and that feature is a must-have for me. The Soundcraft records to a USB stick, multi-track, and I record everything, almost every rehearsal, certainly every show, and I would want to keep doing that with whatever I used. Yeah.
Now, you also have options for Waves cards, Dante. The Wing rack gives you the additional option of internally mounting a Dante card as well. So you could have double the Dante I/O, which, you're looking at 64 additional channels of input and output, which is pretty wild. Yeah. Or you can set up like a Waves grid system where all of those plugins are being processed through one of their grid servers, and you could, the world's your oyster. You could run whatever you want to.
Right.
But the idea that the multi-track card comes in the Wing, straight up is a pretty good deal.
Yeah. Yeah. How much was that card when you added it to the X32?
I just checked Sweetwater before we started recording, and it's $149. I feel like it's come down. I feel like it might have been more when I bought it originally, or it may have just been because the stock was, restricted. But I was one of the first few that grabbed them. I ended up with a Dante card, kind of in the same deal, like right before the chips got constrained due to the pandemic or whatever. But I've got 2 of those cards. I'm using neither of them at the moment.
Straight to Reverb with you.
Yeah. Well, no, but, there's I consider those rainy day purchases. We'll see if I ever need to, bring them up or not.
Yeah.
But that kind of comes down to the next thing, which is the final thing, which is price point.
Yes.
So let's talk dollars and cents. Now, how much was the Soundcraft when you got it?
$1,329.
Okay.
Still is.
$1,329.
$1,329.
Gotcha. So the Wing rack currently retails for $1,599.
Yep.
But it's the latest and greatest. It literally just came out. How long have you had the Studio Live?
Gosh, 2018 maybe.
Okay. And the X32, now that all of it's been kind of sorted out, is currently $899, which is a pretty great deal.
That is a pretty good deal. I'm looking on Reverb now for used ones. Used mint, it looks like it's going for $750-ish.
That's not bad.
That's not bad at all for a Soundcraft UI24R. It's actually really good. Maybe I'll buy another one and cascade them.
There you go.
Maybe.
Might be the cheaper option.
Yeah.
If you were looking at, you were talking about the whole multi-track situation. So if you bought a brand new X32 rack, it'd be $899 US. And then you would have to add the X Live for $149. So you're looking at $1050, which is not bad. I feel like I paid $9.99, maybe $10.99 when I first got ours. But the X32's been out for a pretty solid while.
Long time.
Yeah. And it has earned its place in the pantheon of live sound.
For sure. It was the unit to covet for a long time. Yeah.
And now that we have done the upgrade, I'm kind of hard pressed to figure out what to do with my X32 because frankly, it's great. Still works.
Sure. Well, straight to reverb with you.
No, I don't think so. You know, what if it just becomes like, it could become the new podcast hub. It could be live session in the dungeon solution. It could be the front of house stays wherever it stays. And then this just hangs out and is the rehearsal rig.
All good options.
It could come to the gig as a backup. I mean, I don't have like a hard use for it, but I've got a lot of soft uses for it, if that accounts for anything.
Yeah, it does.
I'm not trying to point you in any particular direction as to what you should or shouldn't get, but I feel like, I mean, just like G.I. Joe says, knowing is half the battle. So this additional information is going to be valuable for you if you're in the market. Because I mean, last week we were talking about like, what are we going to do? What upgrades can we add to the band that will get us to the next level? And if you're currently on an analog rig and a secondhand X32 rack at $600 is out there, that's it. That gets you to the next level.
Yep.
If you're already in that world and you're looking to go beyond what it can offer, the wing rack is above it, or the Soundcraft is above it.
Yep.
So you got a lot of options. You got so many things out there. I mean, even above what the wing is offering, Allen & Heath has their compact rack solution now.
There's some Mackie ones I've been looking at.
Mm-hmm. So the world's your oyster, but in our world, the wing was the right choice, and we're a couple of gigs into it, and I could not be happier.
Okay.
Very pleased with our choice.
Okay.
If there's any information about any of these rigs that you want to know more about, let us know about it. Coverbandconfidential@gmail.com. Leave a comment on the YouTube version of this video. We will, we'll look into it. We'll do our research. We'll provide the information you need. All of these things rip, and it's just going to make your band sound radder than it already is.
Right. It's also kind of a step down the rabbit hole, because the next thing you'll want is in-ears, and then the next thing you'll want is, to upgrade your speakers, and gear is an endless treadmill. But some steps on the treadmill make more difference than others. So I think this is a biggie.
Well, just thinking about the fact that we bought an X32 rack like 7 years ago, and it has been the solution.
Yeah.
And we didn't move on because it stopped being the solution or it crapped out. Just a better option came along.
Right.
The answer isn't always the latest, greatest, shiniest thing. It's just the thing that is further along than you currently are, that makes sense, that hits your budget or whatever. So, don't overthink it.
Don't overthink it.
If you're looking at all of these different categories and all of these specs and the X32 is the answer, then that's the answer.
Perfect.
While you can't spend enough money, you can spend the right amount, whatever that means.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Still undecided about the wing, but we'll see.
Then I guess this entire episode is completely
No,
pointless.
knowledge is power. What did you say?
Knowing is half the battle.
Knowing is half the battle. Thank you. Oh my God.
G.I. Joe.
I gotta turn in my Gen X card.
Hey kid, I'm a computer. Stop all the downloading. That's early internet lore. Anyhow.
I know. Yeah, it's very good.
Folks, thanks so much for tuning in. Couldn't do it without you. Have done it without you. Would prefer not to. If you'd like to support the show, you can do any of the stuff you're about to hear, but I'll go ahead and call it for this week. In Atlanta, Georgia, I am Adam Johnson.
In Greensboro, North Carolina, I'm Dan Ray.
You have been listening to the Coverband Confidential podcast for the week of March 7th, 2025.